Welcome to Pacific States University's online lecture series for Gen 108, Explorations in the Arts. Today, we are diving into the post-impressionist rebels who fundamentally changed how we see the world. By the time we hit the mid-1880s, the art world was going through this massive, seismic shift. To really grasp the gravity of what's happening here, take a look at the screen. Look right into those piercing, kind of haunted eyes of Van Gogh. This isn't just a portrait, is it? It's literally a declaration of a brand new era. Today, we're going to explore exactly how art stopped being just this passive window into the physical world and started becoming a mirror reflecting the human mind.
So here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to start by looking beyond the glance to figure out why these artists rejected Impressionism in the first place. Then we'll dive deep into three completely distinct pioneers: Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Gauguin. And finally, we're going to see how they essentially built the bridge to modernism. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Beyond the Passing Glance and the Rejection of Impressionism. So picture this. It's the mid-1880s. The bright, beautiful colors and those fleeting, spontaneous moments of Impressionism, they've become totally mainstream. It's what everyone is doing. But for a whole new generation of artists, this hard-won victory actually felt kind of hollow. They looked at Impressionist works and started asking a pretty fundamental question. Is that all art is? Just a passing glance? Because to them, by acting basically like a mechanical recording of how light hits an object, art was losing its structural and, frankly, its spiritual depth. It was missing its soul.
If we look at this timeline, from about 1886 up to roughly 1905, there's something absolutely crucial you need to understand. Post-Impressionism was not some unified school of thought. There was no single manifesto, no official club meetings at a Paris cafe. In fact, a lot of these artists could barely tolerate being in the same room as each other. Instead, what we call Post-Impressionism was really just a collection of these fiercely independent rebels who happened to be operating at the exact same time. But they all shared one overarching goal. They shattered the traditional rules of representation. They totally stopped painting what the eye sees, and they started painting what the mind and the soul feel. Which brings us to Section 2, Van Gogh, Emotional Color and Weaponizing Paint for the Psyche. You might already know this, but before he arrived in Paris in 1886, Vincent van Gogh's paintings back in the gloomy, working-class districts of Belgium were incredibly dark and somber, just lots of muddy browns and grays. But then, he encounters the Impressionists, and it literally explodes his world into color. The thing is, though, he didn't care at all about the actual physics of light. Instead, he weaponized what art historians call arbitrary color. That's when you choose a hue not because it's accurate to real life, but because of its psychological punch. Look really closely at his masterpiece on the screen, The Night Cafe. He violently clashes these brutal, blood-red walls against a completely toxic billiard green ceiling. He's doing this to express the intense idea that this cafe is a place where you could ruin yourself, go mad, or even commit a crime. And honestly, it wasn't just his color that was radical. It was his actual physical touch on the canvas. Van Gogh used a technique known as impasto. So rather than smoothly applying his paint to create this seamless, realistic illusion, he's squeezing thick, completely unblended paint straight onto the canvas. Just look at this detail of the Starry Night. The brushstrokes look like physical, swirling ridges of clay. For him, the sky isn't just passive, empty atmosphere. It's this violent, vibrating, living vortex of pure energy. Through this rapid, heavy, incredibly rhythmic brushwork, Van Gogh is taking his own internal psychological turmoil and projecting it directly out onto the external landscape. It's a real game changer.
Let's shift gears now to Section 3, Cézanne, the Architect of Form, and the Geometry of Nature.
So while Van Gogh was pushing art toward this raw, chaotic emotion, Paul Cézanne shifted his focus down south, and he pushed toward pure, undeniable structure. Cézanne actually felt that Impressionism was structurally weak, like it was just dissolving forms into a blurry mist. His whole philosophy, his crucial point, is summed up in his famous declaration. He said he wanted to, and I quote, make of Impressionism something solid and durable, like the art of the museums. He wanted to look right past the chaotic surface of things, and he proclaimed that every single object in nature could basically be reduced to three underlying geometric shapes: the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone.
To actually achieve this sense of order, Cézanne used what we call constructive brushstrokes. You can see it perfectly in his painting of Mont Saint-Victoire. He painted this exact mountain in his hometown literally dozens of times. But look at his incredibly methodical application of paint. Unlike the chaotic, swirling, emotional strokes we just saw with Van Gogh, Cézanne is using these parallel, blocky patches of color. It's almost like he's laying bricks. He is literally building the mountain, patch by patch. He's showing us how the absolute chaos of nature can be brought to a sense of order through underlying geometry. And this brilliantly illustrates what is probably his most revolutionary concept: simultaneous viewpoints. Check out the comparison here. On the left, you've got traditional linear perspective, which gives us a scene locked into a single, frozen viewpoint, kind of like you're looking through a one-eyed camera lens. But over on the right, Cezanne acknowledges something so simple yet profound. The human eye is constantly moving, so he'll paint a basket of apples from one angle, but then he'll paint the table surface from another angle entirely, and maybe the wine bottle from a third. He totally sacrificed the illusion of reality to achieve a much deeper structural truth. He's actually capturing the passage of time and space on a two-dimensional, flat surface. Moving right along to section 4, Gauguin, symbolic synthesis and fleeing the physical world.
Okay, so our third rebel, Paul Gauguin, he utterly loathed Western industrialized society. He abandoned a career as a stockbroker and ended up fleeing to Tahiti because he was absolutely desperate to find this primitive, uncorrupted spiritual reality. And in doing so, he developed an aesthetic style that was totally unique to his worldview, rooted in concepts we call cloisonnism and syntheticism. By using these flat, really broad areas of intense, pure color, bounded by heavy, dark outlines, honestly, it looks a lot like stained glass, he managed to bypass the physical world entirely. He turned art into a synthesis of myth, memory, and just raw, unfiltered sensation.
To really see this in practice, we've got to examine one of his most famous works, The Vision After the Sermon. In this painting, Gauguin is depicting a group of Breton women who are experiencing this intense, collective religious hallucination of Jacob wrestling an angel. But look at the landscape they're in. The ground they're standing on, it isn't green grass. It is a flat, blinding field of solid vermilion red. There's no way around it. This is a deliberate, absolute rejection of the natural physical world. He's doing this so he can vividly visualize a profound internal, psychological, and spiritual landscape. And that brings us to section 5, the bridge to modernism and the birth of the 20th century. You guys, the sheer monumental legacy of these three artists simply cannot be overstated. They lay the absolute foundations for the most important art movements of the 20th century. This table right here maps it out perfectly. First, Vincent van Gogh. By freeing up color and brushwork to express the raw internal psyche, he directly birthed Expressionism and inspired giants like Edvard Munch. Then we have Paul Cézanne. By fracturing perspective and breaking nature down into those geometric blocks, he became the undisputed godfather of Pablo Picasso and Cubism. And finally, Paul Gauguin. By utilizing those flat planes of unnatural, highly symbolic colors, he completely paved the way for Henri Matisse and the wild, vibrant, untamed colors of Fauvism. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. What actually happens when art stops copying the physical world and turns the lens entirely inward? Because the Post-Impressionists, they didn't just tweak the rules of painting a little bit. They completely destroyed a 400-year-old Renaissance paradigm. For 4 whole centuries, a canvas was expected to just be a window mimicking physical reality. But Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Gauguin, they proved that a painting is an independent reality all of its own. It's a place where color, form, and emotion reign supreme over literal facts. I really want you to ponder the true nature of reality on canvas as we wrap up today's session, because next time, we're going to cross the threshold into full-blown modern abstraction. Thank you so much for joining me for this lecture, and I will see you in our next class.